Hey everyone, welcome to the 5th episode of the Warrior Philosopher podcast. Today we'll be covering rationalism and empiricism and some of the philosophers that had major contributions to these trains of thought. So, as usual, you are joined by my good friend Brandon Williamson and myself, Patrick Hamilton. Now, before we go on, I just want to apologize if I sound a little different today. I did bite my tongue last Thursday, and I'm speaking with a little bit of a lisp because the sides of my tongue hurt a little bit. So if you wonder why I sound slightly different, that could be why. Anywho, this is a topic that I was really interested in doing a podcast about. I think that in general, epistemology, and especially with rationalism and empiricism being core topics of epistemology, which essentially is the study of knowledge in general, right? I think it's important to know how we discern why we believe in certain things, how we obtain knowledge, and it helps us kind of, I guess, funnel what's right and wrong and figure out our own human assumptions, the own fallacies that we make in regards to what we believe in, etc.
Yeah.
So I think this is going to be a great podcast, and I'm looking forward to it. You have anything to say before we start?
Yeah. So when Patrick first told me told me that we were going to do this for this week's episode, at first I was a little confused. I didn't really know much about the topic besides rationalism being associated with the Enlightenment in post-Renaissance Europe. But as I did more research and I looked into this, I began to discover that it's actually a pretty interesting topic with a lot of applications to things everywhere in life, pretty much. So I hope you guys find this the same.
Awesome. And one more thing to note, when I think we talked about, I forget if this was on the podcast, but I remember you said you were a little confused with what I initially said about rationalism in general.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So and like I said, I forget if this was on one of the previous podcasts before, but just to clear that up, just in case it was, when we were first talking about rationalism, I talked about the idea of innate understanding of things, and I might have said that in a way that would have been confused as we have all the knowledge within us already through a rationalist mindset. But what I meant by that is we all have the ability to reason, which we will use to come to conclusions about certain aspects of, knowledge in general, right? We obtain knowledge through our innate ability to reason.
Yes.
So that's more what I meant by when I was trying to define rationalism. I used the example that Plato brings, or the story by Plato where Socrates is teaching a slave boy about geometry. And if I explained that incorrectly before, I just like to go over that again and just clear it up a little bit.
Yeah, no, definitely. So what you're saying is my 3-year-old little sister doesn't know nuclear physics, and she just doesn't know it. She just has the ability to reason for that.
So it depends. So Plato believed in immortal beings. Like, he believed that we existed as different people before in history, right?
Yes. So,
technically speaking, if your sister's reincarnation came from a nuclear physicist, then she could know nuclear physics.
Perhaps.
Now, fun fact regarding to that, I was just talking to my dad on the phone earlier today, and he was telling me about how we've actually proven that the atoms within us, have existed pretty much for all time, right? And we're constantly, all the atoms within us have been in other people and other animals and other organisms before us. So this idea of, obviously the idea of an immortal being and reincarnation is a little bit more confusing. But the idea of the makeup of what we are, having once existed within another living organism, is 100%.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
Scientifically proven, which I think is really interesting that he brought that up, because it kind of does relate to that. And obviously that's a much more complex explanation for that, immortal beings and reincarnation and all that. But it's there's so much interesting stuff.
You die, a mushroom eats you, you turn into a mushroom. The mushroom starts to fertilize the ground and it turns into grass. A cow eats the grass and a human eats the cow.
I hope that in my past life I was somebody cool. What about you?
Oh yeah, I would. That would be pretty cool. Yeah.
I hope I was Alexander the Great or Napoleon or something.
Alexander the Great.
Maybe both of them. It's technically possible.
Yeah, it is. It is technically possible.
Yeah. Well,
I could have more than just Genghis Khan's DNA in me.
That's
could
true.
have some Genghis Khan atoms.
Right.
Genghis Khan molecules.
Captain Bruce Lee molecules. That's possible.
That is possible.
Especially considering you're both from Washington.
Yes.
Anyway, without further ado, just to go back to Plato And now, a fun fact about Plato is in pretty much any story where you see Socrates being used, it's Plato using Socrates as a means of explaining his own philosophy.
Yes.
Because pretty much, even like the Republic, for example, it's fiction. It's written like a discussion between all these different characters, but he does this constantly where he uses Socrates as like a fictional recount of Socrates in like story-like format, where he's able to basically teach people by using Socrates, especially considering he was very, very respected throughout, at that time. And Socrates never really had his own works.
Yeah.
Everything that we know about Socrates pretty much comes from
Plato.
Exactly.
Either Plato or other contemporaries at the time.
Right. And since, Plato was a student of Socrates, like I said, he liked to use them in his story. So in the story of I believe it was Meno, right? He talks about Socrates teaching a slave boy geometry.
Yes.
And he claims that when he was teaching this boy geometry, it's not that he had never been taught geometry before, but that he caught on to it quickly because a past version of himself had once learned geometry. Now, this is obviously just one aspect of belief in regards to rationalism, but I might have explained it in a way where we just know everything that could ever exist. But what I meant was basically that application that some rationalists believe that we know certain things because, for example, we lived within the soul of somebody who had once learned that in the past.
Yes.
Such as the case with Meno and the slave boy.
Yeah, but that being said, it's not the only definition
Right.
of rationalism. Yes.
Right. So that we had a little confusion earlier, and I think that's what that stemmed from.
No, definitely.
So, without further ado, let's just define rationalism, define empiricism. Now, we'll see how far we can get into rationalism today. If we can't get too in-depth into empiricism, then this will kind of be more about rationalism, but we'll see how this goes along. But definition of rationalism: a belief or theory that opinions and actions should be based on reason and knowledge rather than on religious belief or emotional response. Now, I don't feel that this definition does enough to really explain rationalism, right?
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think that a better way to describe it, and then I'd like your own opinions as well, is that through different types of reasoning, deductive reasoning, through syllogisms. Syllogisms, for example, is basically when you... I'll pull up the exact definition of syllogisms just so we can make sure we're being consistent. I wrote it down in the notes for today. Aristotle actually was one of the people that contributed this, which is used often in rationalist thought. A syllogism is a kind of logical argument that applies deductive reasoning to arrive at a conclusion based on two propositions that are asserted or assumed to be true. So, like, for example, can you think of an example of a syllogism?
It's when I think of a syllogism, I think of it's almost like the associative property, right? It's or just mathematical properties in general. If A is B and B is C, then A is C.
Right.
That sort of logic, right? Or if A is B and B is not C, then A also is not C. Like that sort of thing is a syllogism.
Right. I would agree with that. And math actually comes a lot into play when in terms of rationalism. Some of the ancient rationalists included Pythagoras, obviously, which we know about the Pythagorean theorem.
Yes.
And he actually had a whole religion all about math and all about numbers.
Yes, I have heard of this before. I haven't looked into it too in depth, but I have heard of that.
Yeah, and it was, I believe, and I could be wrong, but I believe it was actually persecuted at the time because people saw it as like a cult. But he believed all things are made of numbers. And this kind of relates to monads, which we'll also cover briefly in the podcast. Basically, what they're really trying to do was find the specific units which made up existence, in a sense, or which made up objects, right? And then it becomes even more complex when you go into Plato's world of forms, which essentially claimed that the ideas behind things were more real than the physical things that existed, right?
Yes.
Can you touch up on that a little bit too? Because I know that you had something to say about it.
Yeah, so Plato's world of forms, essentially what he's describing there is you have... let's say we in front of us have a cup of tea, right?
I'm having a cup of tea right now.
And the idea of this cup of tea, this plays a lot more into subjective reality, which we'll get into a little bit. I don't really know how to phrase this in the best way. I'm not going to be the best speaker on this, but essentially it's the idea of this cup of tea, or as Plato would call it, its form has more substance than the cup of tea itself, right?
Because the cup of tea itself, we're taking it in through our senses, which can't always be depended upon.
No, from a scientific perspective, this relates to the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. I feel like that's what I got from it. So we can see an atom, right, through an electron microscope, or we can see at least a very small particle, right? However, we do not know that this particle is there based on the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. The particle could be there, the particle could not be there, right? And because of that, the form of this particle, the idea of this particle, is more real than the particle itself, in a sense.
Right. And in general, there's lots of other inconsistencies when it comes to senses in general.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if you consider color blindness, right?
Yes.
The way that we perceive color, women actually can see color more accurately than men can. So we know that, like, you take the idea of orange, right? There is no real orange. There's just different shades of orange, right?
Yes.
And there's infinite shades of orange.
Yes.
But more women can more accurately see the differences between different quote unquote shades of orange than we can.
Interesting.
So that's an aspect of senses not being the same amongst all of us. Therefore, can we really depend upon it?
Yes.
And beyond that, like, you ever play the game Telephone?
Yeah.
Right. Telephone, right? The message is always changing as it goes by.
Exactly.
Therefore, human senses are not always the best tools to be used when you're trying to come to conclusions of knowledge. At least this was what Plato was talking about, and relates to his world of forms. Now, obviously, ancient rationalists contributed a lot to this philosophy. However, obviously, they are ancient rationalists. They lacked a lot.
Yes.
Whereas the Continental rationalists, which we'll go into, I feel had a much better understanding of knowledge in general. Most of them were mathematicians, René Descartes, for example, and Leibniz. Leibniz is actually considered to be the father of computer science, and he contributed to the creation of the first calculators.
Really?
Yeah, so he was a very intelligent guy. Maybe I might just double major in philosophy and computer science one day. Who knows? Shout out to Leibniz.
And as you go through the Continental rationalists, you'll see that this is probably what the average person thinks of rationalism to be, if assuming the average person thinks of rationalism, right? This is, whereas the ancient rationalists, you look at Pythagoras, Plato, Aristotle, especially Pythagoras, as we already mentioned, this was almost a form of religion to them. It was a lot more in depth than just a school of thought. However, as you get into the Continental rationalists, they're mainly turning to rationalism, as the definition said, to more get away from religion, right? This is during the time of the European Enlightenment.
Yes, and also to take a different perspective to religion, because all the rationalists were actually religious.
No,
right?
they were. Yes.
Right. So as opposed to the empiricists, which I feel didn't want to have anything to do with religion almost, whereas the rationalists were using rational philosophy to try to help prove the existence of God. Yes.
I was like, yes, that's actually something I was going to mention. Yes, they were using rationalism to, as Patrick said, to try to prove the existence of God. Some of their arguments are interesting, and I would say not exactly compelling in some cases, but in other cases they are very logical as well. Right,
and they come to these conclusions based on, like we said, reasoning, and we'll get into that. I think Descartes has some very interesting contributions to this that I'll go into. But before we go further, I do want to define metaphysics, because a lot, this is an important topic regarding what we're discussing. So metaphysics is the branch of philosophy that deals with the first principles of things, including abstract concepts such as knowing, substance, cause, identity, time, and space. They would regard the question of the initial conditions for the universe as belonging to the realm of metaphysics or religion, abstract theory with no basis in reality. The very subject of milk pricing involves one in a wonderland of accounting practice and a metaphysic all its own. Now, this will relate as we go further to like objective reality and formal reality, and beyond that, just you see many different aspects of this idea of formal and informal, or of formal and objective reality, and they come up in different ways, and we'll get into that. But beyond that, I also, as we go into the more modern implications of this and the more modern approaches towards these things, we also should define positivism.
Yes.
Now, when obviously we're we're trying to find the best way to obtain knowledge, which means we're not going to be completely rationalist, but we're not going to be completely empiricist. But I feel that today people put too much emphasis on obtaining knowledge through more empirical means, like the use of science, needing complete logical proofs to be able to believe in something.
Yes, observing something. They need to, seeing is believing is a common thing, right? Like, how often do you hear people today say that there is no proof of God, therefore God can't exist, right? It's logic such as that is very empiricist and positivist as well.
Well, yeah, so positivism is actually called logical empiricism.
Yes.
Right. So empiricism itself, I would say positivism's part of the spectrum of empiricism. Within the spectrum of rationalism, you also have a spectrum of empiricism where you have, I would say positivism is like, let's say that the middle is the middle. So we have the middle being the middle ground between rationalism and empiricism. I'd say more of the ancient rationalists were all the way on the left, let's say, if we're putting rationalism on the left. If empiricism's on the right, I'd say positivists are on the far right of this spectrum.
Yes.
Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree.
Like they're, I don't want to say extremists because obviously the implications of these aren't like extremists, like terrorists. This is just, but it is essentially the extreme side of the spectrum in terms of empiricism.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
Right. So,
if you look at modern examples of positivism. Patrick Patrick earlier today, as we were talking about this, brought up Neil deGrasse Tyson for that example. And would you like to comment on that a little bit more?
Yeah. So basically, we completely disagree with this, obviously, because we are the warrior philosopher. Neil deGrasse Tyson basically says the study of philosophy is completely useless, and that everything worthwhile in terms of knowledge can be obtained through science, which I, of course, completely disagree with. And Neil deGrasse Tyson, if you're listening to this, I'm calling you out right now. Let's talk. Wow, he's obviously smart when it comes to
science astrophysics, right? But I don't think it's he may be as intelligent as he wants to be, or as intelligent as he is, but I think it's rather ignorant to look at all of the great things that we can learn from philosophy out there, right?
Quite arrogant too.
Yes, quite arrogant as well. Can anybody out there truly tell me that the great quotes that we read out from Bruce Lee last week, like none of them contain any knowledge at all?
Even when he was high.
Yeah, even when he was high, right?
Yeah. Now, like I said, my voice is kind of a little bit messed up today. Would you do me the honors of, after you're done sneezing, read the definition of positivism?
Yeah, hopefully I don't sneeze during this. Yes, positivism, a philosophical system that holds every rationally justifiable assertion can be scientifically verified or is capable of logical or mathematical proof, and that therefore rejects metaphysics and theism. A humanistic religious system found on positivism, another term for logical positivism. The second definition being the theory that laws are to be understood as social rules, valid because they are enacted by authority, or derive logically from existing decisions, and that ideal or moral considerations, such as a rule is unjust, should not limit the scope or operation of the law.
Right, and like you said, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Stephen Hawking was also another proponent of positivism. So when we're kind of thinking of, in general, empiricism, I think is at least people believe in science today.
Yeah.
I would say an over-reliance on science.
Over-reliance. I mean, yeah, it's one thing to believe in science, right? It's another to, as you said, become overly reliant on science to the point where science turns into your religion, right?
Right. Which is why I would say, if we're going to talk about modern empiricists, it's hard to say modern empiricists because most people are essentially empiricists today. So positivism would be that's what I would call modern empiricists if we want to delineate, especially empirical people, right? So I think that's an important definition to go through. Today, in terms of rationalism, this is commonly debated whether he's a rationalist or a lot, but people will generally consider Noam Chomsky a rationalist due to his belief in nativism and his linguistic theory, which we'll go into later. So when we consider the modern extremes, right? At least when it comes to empiricism, we'll use positivism. And then because of the fact that I think rationalism and generally critical thinking in general and the ability to reason is something that we've I feel like generally speaking, people are less, what's the word I'm looking for? Less concerned with today.
Yes, less concerned with, because so often today do you have knowledge at your fingertips that there's almost no point to think deeply into it, right? There's, I know that when I was a little kid, and Patrick, I feel like you were the same because we're so very similar.
Yeah.
When I was a little kid, I was constantly like looking for knowledge. I was just a very curious kid, right? As most kids are curious. But you look today and curiosity almost isn't there as much for kids as it used to be.
I mean, I don't know if this is true for you, but when I used to like want to know things, it was almost like to create this imaginary world of like things that happened in the past. It's like I can live in that. Whereas today, like every kid has like a smartphone or a computer and they can play video games. You don't need to create that imaginary world of the past to be able to escape. You just escape through your PS4.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Do you agree with that?
Right. No, I totally agree with that. So going on from there, because it's so at your fingertips, right? Why would you want to think deeply into it?
Absolutely. And even like within empirical data, you have like articles or news reports. Empirical data can be skewed to support a specific argument, first of all.
Without a doubt.
Right? Like you could survey a specific demographic, for example, to provide a certain response. And
you can make your sample size really small.
Exactly. And on top of that, empirical data on its own doesn't mean anything. You need context, and you need the ability to reason to say, why is this data important? Is this data accurate?
Yeah.
And how am I going to use it to build my beliefs off of, right? To come to a conclusion. So all this leads into reason in general and why we're saying, like, we talk about positivism and how people are so focused on just, scientific proofs for things, essentially, over-reliance on science. And I think it's important to delve deeper into rationalism and just reason in general and why it is important in terms of developing your critical thinking and just questioning, because you should question as many things as possible.
No.
And that's what a lot of these philosophers did on the empiricist side as well.
Yeah.
Right?
You don't want to just be blindly faithful to everything in life, right?
Right.
No, definitely.
So I think this is a perfect way to lead into Descartes. And now, just to give a quick intro into René Descartes, he was a mathematician and a philosopher. He was the philosopher who coined the term "I think, therefore I am," and that's a very important statement because ultimately our own existence, right? How do we know we exist?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. We exist within our own heads, maybe this is a schizophrenic approach, but how do we know that anything out there exists?
Right. And that falls into Descartes' proof of God and why he believes we need a God. So he talks about and a lot of these philosophers talk about this, like a designer.
Yes.
Right? The person who designed the world. Essentially, the reason why, I think therefore I am, it all depends upon someone initially with purpose, a all good being creating the universe.
Yeah.
So in the eyes of Descartes, for example, I think therefore I am. Now, that can be countered with what if there's, and I got this from the Philosophize This podcast, shout out to Stephen West, Adam West, I always forget what his first name is. he gives the example, of this, what if there's like an evil demon who's feeding my he's feeding my senses with incorrect information. He's like a schizophrenic, essentially, right?
Yeah.
You could argue, you can make the analogy that mental illness in regards to schizophrenia is like an evil demon putting false thoughts in your head, right?
Yeah.
Or false realities. So if we don't establish the fact of there being an all-good designer of the universe who is not going to be feeding us false thoughts, who did not give us senses or the ability to reason, which will lead us to false conclusions, then an all-good designer must exist. You know what I mean? So therefore, I think, therefore I am isn't just something that's countered with, well, everything that you think is false, everything that you see, hear, smell, taste is all wrong, right?
Yeah.
You kind of need this. And this also goes into objective reality and formal reality. So when we think about God, for example, the concept of God, obviously it's not something that exists within our physical world.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah.
It's metaphysical.
Yeah, metaphysical, there you go, to use a word that came up here. He definitely exists outside the plane of this universe.
Right, and it would be impossible to exist within the physical realm because of something so profound, I guess. Like, And we go back to Maimonides and we talk about the word benevolent, right?
Yes.
We used that example in the podcast before. Your benevolence does not equal the all-powerful, all-good creator of the universe's benevolence, right? It just, you're on a whole different playing field, literally. No offense, Brandon. But, that's where we get into formal reality and objective reality. This is the perfect example of it is the perfect triangle. Within our physical world, does a perfect triangle exist?
No.
No, and it doesn't exist because of infinity. Within 0 to 1, you have an infinite amount of combinations, right? Yeah. Same thing with like a table, like the table we're sitting on right now. It appears, or even you talk about Earth, like the Earth being flat, right? It looks flat, from our perspective, but it obviously is curving.
Yes.
The same way a perfect triangle might look straight, from a distance, but you look into it, you're like, well, there's a slight crookedness here, or a slight jagged end.
You can never make anything actually perfect. And even with modern technology, let's say I were to get something down to the atoms, right? And it had 10 atoms on each side, right? And obviously it's an equilateral triangle, so 60 60 60, right? For its degrees. If you look into it enough, right? Even if you were to put all of that perfect, right? You still have, as Plato brought up, and as I brought up earlier with the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, right? How do you really know if all the particles are there, right? So, there's that whole thing as well.
Yeah, and of course, we can't trust our senses because there's a demon telling us the wrong thing. So How can we know? No, but in all seriousness, though, this idea of objective reality, things that we know exist, the ideas of things at the very least, right? Certain mathematical proofs, like, the Pythagorean theorem, or perfect triangles, a right triangle, all these different things which need to be exact, with certainty. And that's why math is so interesting. And I think the reason why it's used in rationalist philosophy a lot is because certain aspects of math, technically all math is completely, it has to be completely true because otherwise it won't exist. If A plus B is equal to D, it's not going to equal C.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or unless C equals D.
Yeah, unless C equals D.
But if C doesn't equal D,
yes,
then A plus B equaling D can't be A plus B equaling C.
Yes.
Like math is it's not subjective. It exists. You know what I mean? What's right is right, what's wrong is wrong. Therefore, a lot of times you can use certain mathematical proofs to be like, okay, because I can prove that, all right, you are Brandon. As a unit of measurement, there's one Brandon,
Yeah.
Let's say you had a clone next to you. I see one Brandon there, that's two Brandons. It's undisputable. But then, of course, you could go into the senses like, oh, well, you actually saw three Brandons. Your eyes are wrong,
Yeah.
But you get the idea, behind what I'm trying to say, right?
No, definitely. And then on that point, Aristotle touched on it too, I believe. He touched on the point that if... I forget what they were, but he provided 4 categories of something. I forget what the 4 categories were called, but essentially they were
not monads, is it?
No.
Okay.
No.
Now Leibniz, we'll get into that. He talks about monads.
Aside from the 4 categories, since I can't remember that, I believe it was Aristotle who posited that if 2 things share all the exact traits of one another, then they have to be the same thing, right? So
that relates to syllogisms as well.
Yeah.
In a sense.
Yes. You can't have. So this sounds like it's a very obvious thing, right? Like yeah. But it relates to the whole rationalist mindset and more cognitive thinking than just associating with one, rather than just associating with what am I trying to with your senses? There we go. With your your sensory perception.
And it's like the reason I like these Continental rationalists is because they don't completely disavow using the 5 senses. It's just that we can't. There's a lot of inconsistencies within that. So formal reality, things that exist with physical form, with being, like this table in front of me. At least I think so. I think it exists because I can sense it, right? That's formal reality, right? So assuming that we don't have the demon king. I'm always going to bring that guy up. But anyway, objective reality, formal reality, there's also a lot of different takes on this which we'll see as we go forward. Now, when we're talking about rationalism, a lot of times the idea of idealism comes up, right? So idealism in general, it's kind of like, to define it, it's the term that identifies and describes metaphysical perspectives which assert that reality is indistinguishable and inseparable from human perception and understanding, that reality is a mental construct closely connected to ideas. So or this relates to the metaphysical things beyond physical existence.
Yeah.
Is how I would purport it. And in general, this sort of supports the idea of rationalism. The non-physical existence of things, essentially, right? Without getting too in depth within it.
No, so and it kind of goes along with Descartes from how I interpreted it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like, just as you need there to be a good God, right? A good higher being, right? A good originator for you to have the basis to say that my reality isn't just me
given to me, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. You need that in the same way that how do I know that what I'm perceiving is not completely different than what you're perceiving, right? Like how it's along the same planes of that. That's how I interpreted it.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting in regards to philosophy in general. Like, you talk about how do I know what I'm experiencing is the same as you, and it goes into language.
Yeah,
and the importance of language. I mean, essentially, when you're studying philosophy, you're really just studying language and how to because like a lot of these ideas are pretty innate, mm-hmm. right? But through the use of language, we're using specific words to deal with specific, very unique feelings, very unique inferences, or just unique concepts. You need language to be able to transfer these ideas, to discuss them,
mm-hmm.
and
doubt,
that's like the only thing really for me to be able to tell you that what I'm experiencing is the same as what you're experiencing.
Oh yeah, definitely. Right.
And beyond that, like we talk about the proof of God, which is very common among the continent. I mean, every continental rationalist essentially had some sort of proof of God using reasoning, which is very difficult to do. At a certain point, you might not be able to really prove God through reasoning or empiricism, and it's just completely in the metaphysical, right? Sometimes you just have to kind of acknowledge that you're not going to be able to make it in a sense that you can comprehend. You know what I mean? Like, It could be just completely incomprehensible, the same way aspects of science are completely incomprehensible to us right now.
Oh yeah.
Some ideas you just can't put into words.
Mm-hmm.
So, it goes. So what I'm trying to say is that obviously a lot of these, and you brought it up before, proofs of God's existence can be a little bit like, what am I reading?
Yeah.
Which brings us into Spinoza. Now, pantheism in general, which is actually a major proponent of Stoicism,
mm-hmm.
it's essentially, when we talked about logos in the first episode, God being the universe,
mm-hmm.
that's essentially what pantheism is, believing that God exists in all things, but like God is all things.
Yeah.
And Spinoza, when he's talking about, Spinoza, another important continental rationalist, and he was I guess I would say, a big inspiration for Leibniz coming after him. So Spinoza's proof of God's existence, he tried to so he used the pantheist kind of belief. So he said that Spinoza attempted to prove that God is like the substance of the universe, right? Like he does not. So he talks about different substances and attributes. God is like the infinite, conglomeration of all these substances, and like the vastness of everything that exists, that's God.
Yeah.
So it's essentially pantheist, it's like the Stoics with the logos, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that doesn't really, I don't really think that helps prove God at all. That's just a statement of what God is.
Yeah.
So that's why I would say when you take these with a grain of salt, it's like hard to, can I really use this? It's like, I don't know. It's difficult. Now I do think Leibniz works, for me at least, were a little bit more easy to understand. But, in general, for those of you that don't know what pantheism is, if you want an exact definition, it's like the doctrine that the universe conceived as a whole is God. Logos, mm-hmm. God being the universe. And conversely, there is no God but the combined substance, forces, and laws that are manifested in the existing universe. So Spinoza's belief of God would have differed potentially from some of the other continental rationalists, because the way that I perceive his perception of God is that God isn't necessarily conscious, and I don't know if Descartes would quite agree with that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because God, he would disagree, because he did say, God is not, God is actively making sure he's not tricking us.
Yes.
That's what, that's essentially what Descartes is saying. So there are some differences.
Oh yeah.
With that, pantheism in general, but still very interesting. And, in a sense, yes, the concept of God, everyone will agree everything is God, mm-hmm. to an extent, right? But then the difference here being with Spinoza, in my belief, is that the consciousness of God is what differs, and he doesn't seem to really talk about the consciousness of God. So my perception of his belief of God is more of a just kind of wide, like everything is God. So like logos. That seems to be what I got from Spinoza.
Yeah, I can relate with that. That makes sense.
Yeah. So, but that is a little more confusing. I would say it's not so. And like we said, in general, when it comes to metaphysical things, sometimes we can't put it into words. So a lot of these things trying to describe metaphysical phenomena are going to be difficult for us to understand.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So it's not like crazy that, this is kind of difficult to, comprehend. It's supposed to be. So...
And I think as Christians, not to go too into religion for this one, but as Christians, we have to accept that God is in the metaphysical. God tells us to accept that God is in the metaphysical.
Right.
In Isaiah 55:9, one of my favorite verses, God says, "For just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so too are my ways higher than yours and my thoughts than yours."
Right.
Yes.
And that's like, it's exactly, the kind of thing we're talking about, metaphysical, right?
Exactly.
Which makes the idea of Jesus Christ so interesting. If you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, then that's like breaking the barriers, of metaphysical and physical. And that's something very difficult to put into words. Okay. Because, the idea of Jesus Christ is neither regulated to objective reality or formal reality. It's like a combination. So that's just an interesting thing to consider. Now, in general, right, the differences between Leibniz and Spinoza. Now, like we said, Spinoza, with his pantheist belief, believed the universe is God. Therefore, the universe is one living element, one entity, right? Whereas Leibniz talks about the concept of monads. Now, there's a type of monad that exists in computer science, and since I haven't gone to college for computer science yet, I don't know what it is, but I just want to clarify it is not that monad. I don't believe. There's a specific monad within philosophy, which is honestly super complicated. I had a hard time trying to figure out what it meant.
Yeah, no, it was getting at me too.
Yeah, but it's interesting.
It is definitely interesting.
And I'm not going to go into it, but Leibniz talks about like 3 different levels of monads, and I just didn't really want to spend too much time on that because I didn't know how to explain it. So we'll skip that and we'll just kind of go into a brief description of what a monad is. Ultimately, some people today say there's no point in studying monads, but I do think it's interesting. Leibniz, with what he talked about monads, it's different from atoms, but the way he describes them made me think of atoms. He talks about the universe is made up of monads and different things, and each monad's almost like a soul. And God is actually one form of a monad. So it's like these independent. They're not just like atoms that just flow around. They're like almost like they're all spiritual entities.
Yeah.
Right. Like a monad's a soul or something, and he calls it the ultimate unit of existence in nature. Monads making up the universe, right?
If any of you guys listening to this understand the concept of monads pretty well, we'd love for you guys to mention it in the comments. We get a lot.
For layman terms.
Yeah, we see a lot of you guys get they correct us on some stuff. So if anybody
whenever
knows...
I misspell Miyamoto Musashi,
yeah,
it happens a lot. But so some similarities between monads and atoms, for example. An atom is essentially indestructible. You can split an atom, but you can't destroy an atom. Atom is it's the smallest building block of anything, right? And a monad exists in a similar way. You can't destroy it, but it can't be split either. And an atom can be split, and it's not very good when it does. But monads are definitely tied to the metaphysical. They're not an atom we can see. Of course, we go into the whole height.
Yeah. But no, definitely. Yeah,
right. You can see an atom, and you can identify that atoms exist. Monads, on the other hand, aren't meant to have. They're immaterial. They're not meant to be a physical thing. So they're relating to metaphysics, sort of objective reality. It's not a physical thing. It's the soul essentially. It's like the building blocks of the soul. And it's confusing stuff, but it's different from an atom. An atom is physical. It makes up all of us. The same atoms within us existed, pretty much forever.
So would it be safe to say that while atoms are clearly in the objective reality,
atoms are in the objective?
Oh, no, sorry, the formal reality. My bad.
Right.
These monads are in the objective reality.
Yes, I would say it's pretty safe to say that because they're immaterial.
Yes.
If they're immaterial, then they can't be in the formal reality. So yeah, that's one way to look at it. But it's interesting that these two kind of things exist. You think, how do they relate to each other? Can they exist can they both exist and be comparable? I don't know. So monads, that's something that you can't prove exists, but you can't prove it doesn't exist either.
Yeah, right.
So, it's interesting though. Now, going into Leibniz's proof of God, I think this is pretty interesting. So I'm just going to read off some things that I see. Oh, I'll interpret them. So, when you go into reasoning and you talk about causality, one thing causing another, essentially that's an aspect of reasoning. Like, if A plus B is equal to C, and then and C does not equal to D, then A plus B does not equal to C, right? But there's always got to be something to begin with. You need one fundamental truth to be able to build off of other truths. And my interpretation of Leibniz's proof of God is that, he talks about the first thing, the first aspect that we get reason from is God, right? We mentioned morality when we were talking earlier today. It's like, how can you define morality without, for you take God, for example, or the Bible as a foundation of morality? Because morality is always, it does change quite a bit between different cultures, right? But we talk about things that are fundamentally good, fundamentally bad. That needs to start with one thing. Yeah. You know what I mean? You don't just come up with it out of the blue. So I'd like to hear your thoughts of what I just said, or Leibniz's proof of God, but I kind of interpret it as like, to be able to make all these reasons, all these conclusions, it all starts with God, No,
and I definitely agreed with that. I like specifically the book analogy that you were giving me earlier, right? So back then, especially, this was, like the Gutenberg printing press had like just been invented. So like a lot of the books were still getting translated like hand down, or like by hand to hand, or like one book at a time instead of mass printing. So Leibniz, one of his analogies that he gave was, if I have this textbook, right, there has to have been an original textbook the first time that this textbook was written, right? And that first time that the textbook was written is in the over thing. It's God. He calls this the I'm not super good with my pronunciation, but
Modas
it's like
Monadum.
Yeah, Modas Monadum. Something along the lines of that.
Sounds Latin to me.
Yeah. And I thought this also related. Oh, okay. When I first read this, I had a very good, another very good analogy to this. But no, it makes sense, right? Like, you need that original creator, right? And especially if you look at the overall concept of God, right? And then people can have different definitions of God, and A and B, but A and B. As long as you define God as the original creator of all things, I mean, you really can't. Like Leibniz really can't be wrong here, as long as you define God as the original creator of all things.
Right. And that is interesting. The whole idea of something initial, right? Yeah. And this is the basis essentially for Leibniz principles, right? And these are just different ways that you come to knowledge, right? Oh yeah. Which I'd like to go over. So he talks about identity and contradiction. If a proposition is true, then its negation is false, and vice versa. So the equation we provided, if C doesn't equal D and A plus B is equal to C, A plus B can't equal to D.
Yeah, right? Or if A plus B equals C, then A plus B not equaling C is false, obviously, right? Yeah. It's just simple as that, right?
Right, but these are all simple concepts, but it's important you have you have some sort of writing about them. You have something to refer to. People overlook the simplicity that ultimately makes up good arguments, good ways to obtain knowledge, right? And he also talks about the identity of indiscernibles. So like two distinct objects, or two different things. They can't all completely be true.
Yeah, and it goes into the Aristotle thing I brought up earlier. I can't remember exactly what Aristotle said on that, but it's the same, right? If I have two identical wine glasses, everything about them is identical, right? They're still not the same because they're next to each other. They're in different locations in space, or different locations in time, whatever have you.
Yeah, it's like A is A and B is B.
Yeah.
Right? Or like, now I don't know how closely this relates to this, but going back to, we talk about perfect things, right? You take two twins, they're not exactly alike. No. They're splits of the same egg. They might be identical twins, but there's
no matter how much nature is behind it, nurture is also going to take its impact, and the way that they've gone through life different. One might have a scar, from an event, or one might have different views on the world,
Or just like I'm trying to think what I was going to say. Even if you look at like, let's take atoms for example, right? There's still a different atom in one thing than another, even if those two things are exactly alike. Yes. So it's just the very essence of that, So I kind of get what he means. But this is kind of it's sort of controversial. When you get into, now I don't know why it's controversial, but when I was reading, it talks about some controversy. It brings up due to like quantum mechanics. So I'll have to look more into that to be able to talk about that. But anyway, moving on. It talks about sufficient reason. There must be sufficient reason for anything to exist, for any event to occur, for any truth to obtain. I think that's relatively straightforward. Like you can't just say dragons exist.
Yeah, when I read this, I think it's he's taking more of like a physics approach for this, and nothing can happen without a reason, right? If there must be a catalyst to something, even spontaneous reactions, like let's say spontaneous nuclear fission, that happens because the atom was unstable to create or to begin with, right? Nothing is truly spontaneous,
right? Or even talk about Isaac Newton and his different laws, like object without motion needs another object. I forget the exact.
An object in motion tends to stay in motion. An object at rest tends to stay at rest. Therefore, an object at rest will not enter into motion without a force acting upon it.
Right. And he also talks about like pre-established harmony. So basically how I would interpret this, right? It's kind of similar to...
Yeah.
I would say it's kind of similar to like, we're talking about the laws. You talk about if you drop, let's say, I'm trying to think of a way to explain.
This one I wasn't I didn't completely agree with this one, specifically because the example given here for this one is a dropped glass shatters because it knows it hit the ground, not because the impact with the ground compels the glass to split.
What does that really...
Yeah, what does that really mean? In my mind, just thinking about that, the impact with the ground is what compels it to split. It's not like the glass has a mind in its own to know that it hit the ground.
Well, I don't know, Brandon, if a tree falls in the middle of the woods, can you hear it falling?
I think this is kind of going into the along with the highs, I forget the specific principle of quantum mechanics that this goes along with, but there is a chance, right? It may be like 1 in however trillion, but there is a chance that if I drop this glass onto a table, right? It'll all the atoms in it will perfectly line up, and it'll because of the space within atoms, all the atoms within it will perfectly line up, and there is a chance that it'll go through the table completely unharmed. That's a law of quantum mechanics, or not a law, a theory posited in quantum mechanics, and right, yeah, that's kind of what I thought of when I thought of the original harmony. I forget what the exact word is. Pre-established harmony.
That's good, because I didn't know what the hell to say. You have anything about law of continuity?
Nature does not make... Yeah, the law of continuity is the same as... when I read it, nature does not make jumps is the translation from the Latin that was used. I feel like it's the same exact thing as before. You can't... There's no... There has to have... It has to be a chain reaction, right? You never just randomly end up with the...
Well, I thought of an example. So in the past, they used to believe that if you left trash out, rats would spontaneously... No, I'm serious. That was an actual belief in the past. I forget the name of that, but they believe that rats would just come out of the trash, or they believe the reason why flies came around poop, for example, is because they grew from the poop. But we know they just got attracted to it and they laid their eggs. But that's refuting this old false.
And what
belief.
He's saying here is it's always a chain of events, right? Every action has a cause, but it also has an effect, and that effect will end up causing another reaction, similar to what's it called, the butterfly effect, right? If a butterfly flaps its wings in Africa, you never know how that might disturb the molecules of in the atmosphere and eventually change weather patterns in fucking Brazil, right? That's how I interpreted that.
No, I would agree with that. Now, the next few things I think really go together quite well, and I did understand this. Luckily, he talks about optimism, and Leibniz believed that God created the best possible world he could have created, and this goes into he believes that evil, for example, that takes place in the world, it's because each human has free will, and that human is choosing to do evil. It's not because God from the beginning, God created something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then through free will, everything can happen as it can happen. Whereas, like, God will not actively be trying to make things good or bad because he made things the way they were intended to be in the beginning, essentially. So, like, through all the different possibilities, like infinite possibilities, this is the best possible world we can exist in. And that's nice. I hope that is true. But, this, obviously, I don't know how I actually feel about that. Like, I don't know if this is the best possible world, right? It doesn't even have to be the best possible world. How important is that really?
Yeah,
right.
no.
But at least we know that within the world that we live in, we can survive and we can do something with it. Find deeper meaning within it. So that kind of covers the continental the continental rationalists. Which.
I mean, you could call them constitutional rationalists. The founding fathers were very, very intrigued by rationalism. So,
of course, yeah, yes. Let's change history. We'll from this day forth we'll call them the constitutional rationalists. Anyway, now today, like we said, there's a lot less. There's more of an emphasis on empiricism generally, but like I said previously. People have argued whether like Noam Chomsky is a rationalist exactly, but a lot of people have talked about him being a rationalist, and we'll explain why. Now, when we look at like Chomsky's linguistic theory, it's so he believes that like despite. So you talk about nature versus nurture, right? You talk about nurture in regards to language, how different peoples throughout the world based on their environment have slightly different languages, right?
Yeah.
But Chomsky would talk about some innate composition of every language. Now, there is a belief that, and I don't know too much about this statement that I'm about to make, but I have heard that like every person, like scientifically, comes from like one person, like one person who somehow based on their I guess based on the things that they pass on to the rest of their offspring, like they had like some sort of. I'm trying to think how to like put this into words. Let me simplify it a little bit. So the idea that the linguistic structure behind our languages is something that's innate within all humans, like specific grammatical patterns and stuff like that. Like
for example, the reason why if you look at languages, almost all of them, the word for mother, right, has an M sound, right? Mm-hmm. Like in Korean, it's oma, omani. In Chinese, it's
mama.
Yeah, mama, right? Mom, ma, mommy, mother, madre, whatever have you. And that's because the first sounds that a baby's able to make is just pairing a consonant with a vowel, right? Mm-hmm. And the first consonant you're able to making is just humming and then opening your mouth, right?
It's easy.
Ma, ma, ma. There you go. And that ends up becoming ma from there. And then after a little bit, they learn how to make a pop noise. They learn how to throw more air as they open their mouth, and it goes pa, pa, pa. And that ends up being
papa, dada,
appa.
Abba, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I don't know about you, but I heard that Karl Marx's first words were "Workers of the world unite."
Yeah.
I didn't think you'd laugh that much. I'm very proud of myself. But anyway, yeah. So like, some things are not, like that's an example. Like that's not nature. That's just the way that we have the way that we are naturally, I guess, is an easy way to say it. But even like, so how I think we've talked about this before. Now, there's two sides to this coin, like aliens, for example, right? Yeah. On the one hand, I'll be like, why are most depictions of aliens like humans?
This is where our podcast turns into the Joe Rogan experience.
No. This is not about aliens. This is more about evolution in general. So there's two sides to this. Mm-hmm. It could be that we don't know how complex aliens could be, so we just like to assume they look similar to us. Mm-hmm. But there's another argument, and I can see this, is that to be a hominid, or like a hominid,
mm-hmm. He's relatively humanoid,
right?
Bipedal, relatively not a mammal, mm-hmm. But if you're an alien, who knows what you are?
Yeah,
but relatively primate in nature.
Yeah, like that might be necessary for higher, advancement, within civilization, like to create a civilization to be able to, you have like language, for example. It's incredibly important when you consider everything we do.
Yeah.
You know, we need language to communicate ideas, to be able to communicate with one another, to build things, to hunt.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like, so like the ability to speak is incredibly important, right? But then like you look at some animals that can't speak, and some animals that can kind of communicate with each other but don't have hands. You need hands and you need the ability to speak, I think.
Yeah.
Like dolphins have like special ways to communicate where it's like almost like language, but they don't have any hands, so what are they going to do? They can't build a freaking underwater underwater castle, but they're very smart, right? But then you see like animals that have hands.
Like
Even
great apes.
great apes, or even raccoons, though. Raccoons are really intelligent.
Yeah.
Like, you just think of all the I don't know too much about this, but like, I believe I saw something like just having hands like has a bunch of more, like a lot more neurons firing in the brain because you have, you know, the connection that you make between your brain to fingers, right? Working in cooperation just to pick something up. Like, we kind of take that for granted, but just, you know, think about that, right?
Or one of the things that I read, I personally don't believe in evolution that much, but
this is where me and Brandon differ.
But one of the things that I've read is that the fact that we're weak, right? Like we're obviously not incredibly.
We're not as strong as an ape.
No, but we're not as strong as plenty of other animals our size, right? Like you look at chimps, right? Chimps are smaller than us, but their muscle mass is right, exactly. And that contributes to the way that we've evolved to be smarter, to be overall better, and because we needed to survive in other ways without relying on our brute strength, and that brute strength, in fact, is
it's like a disadvantage.
Yes, a disadvantage.
You can rely over-reliant on it.
Yeah,
we have to use our mind.
Yeah. No, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's plenty of even in modern warfare, there's plenty of reasons that brute strength is still going to carry you to.
But
greater
like
length,
you said,
but
nothing compared to
other
animals.
Yes, exactly.
Right? And so the reason I'm bringing this up is that you take language in general. If you consider the fact that we needed specific things going on in our brain to be genetically passed down, like we do, like, you know, and like I said, I need to read more into this, but you know, and like you know, I quote evolution a lot, and I look into evolution, and one evolutionary belief is that there was like one specific woman in Ethiopia, which we all share lineage with, and the reason why is because the way that her brain was or something was the best for being able to eventually lead to all these like I guess advancements that we had, like, you know, the ability to speak language and all these different things, right?
Yeah.
And like I have to look more into that. That's just a theory, but in general, maybe, and you know, this relates to linguistic theory, we all have something within our brains that originated, like, you know, from one or a small group of people, which ultimately, you know, brings out these specific patterns within language.
Yeah.
Right? And that aren't just reliant on, because we do know that language is obviously influenced by location, but that there are some fundamental things that remain the same. And the reason I bring up the alien argument is because maybe they are almost hominid or humanoid and have hands and legs, because maybe that is the perfect composition to be able to survive as a sentient being.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Maybe.
And now, on the other hand, aliens could be completely different than us. They could be like bacteria or gaseous or who knows, right?
Yeah.
But like, you know,
maybe not even carbon based,
right?
Like, yeah.
But then, like I said, there's two sides of the coin. Both of those things could exist, right? But you know, the same with, you know, when we talk about innate ability to reason, innate ability to come to conclusions about things, especially, you know, and this relates to linguistic theory, and it relates to nativism. You know, so talking about nativism, and I'll just like we always like to use our definitions, right? In the field of psychology, nativism is the view that certain skills or abilities are native or hardwired into the brain. This is in contrast to the blank slate or tabula rasa view, which states that the brain has inborn capabilities for learning from the environment, but does not contain content such as innate beliefs. This factor contributes to the ongoing nature versus nurture dispute, one born from the current difficulty of reverse engineering the subconscious operations of the brain, especially the human brain. Some nativists believe that specific beliefs or preferences are hardwired. For example, one might argue that some moral intuitions are innate, or that color preferences are innate. A less established argument is that nature supplies the human mind with specialized learning devices. The latter view differs from empiricism only to the extent that the algorithms that translate experience into information may be more complex and specialized in nativist theories than empiricist theories. However, empiricists largely remain open to the nature of learning algorithms and are by no means restricted to the historical association associationist mechanisms of behaviorism. So obviously that was a long definition, but generally speaking, and that's why we'll say that like there's a lot of debate whether Noam Chomsky is a rationalist, because you look at the idea of nativism, it does kind of it doesn't, like, you know, like it said here, a lot of empiricists don't are like open to this being something. But then again, we talk about, and this is something I was talking to my dad about earlier, and something that you have to kind of think about. So let's say that, you know, certain things are hardwired into us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, it doesn't necessarily make it rationalist or empiricist if now previous, let's say, like so you talk about, let's go back to the Plato and the Mono.
Yeah.
Or Meno.
Yeah, Meno.
He says that Meno knew how to do geometry because his past self did geometry.
Yeah.
Technically, that past self might have learned that through sensory experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is it rationalist to say, like, is you talk about like instinct, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, certain animals can be born and know how to hunt instantly. Is that a result of empiricism because they somewhere down the line, like sensory experiences created this evolutionary trait, or is it due to, or is it an aspect of rationalism, considering it's something that you're innately born with? Like, you know, it just becomes a little bit convoluted.
Yeah, it goes convoluted. Yeah.
So that's, like I said, that's why the interpretation of whether Noam Chomsky is a rationalist or not is a little bit hard to come to a conclusion of. But either way, right? You know, if you want to talk about moral things, I'll consider this a rationalist thought. At the end of the day, certain moral stances that we have are necessary for survival.
Oh yeah, no, without a doubt, right? Like, I think every culture can agree that murder is bad.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I mean, I would like to strongly here give the definition, or not the definition. Talk about the difference between murder and necessary killing. Necessary can be thrown in quotation marks, right? But killing because of war, is not murder. Right, because lots of cultures are certainly okay with killing in war. Some more than others, but actual pure murder, I think pretty much I can't think of a culture out there that doesn't think that murder is bad, and that's
Satanists.
Okay,
I don't know. I don't know.
Right.
I'm not sure.
But then even then you could argue that that's not necessarily.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, obviously, right? Obviously you're kidding, but even then you could argue that's not murder, that's killing because of a reason. Anyways, so on and so forth. I'm not a Satanist or endorsing Satanism by any means. However, murder or the harm towards children, these things directly impact the survival of the species from an evolutionary standpoint, right? If the species is within is killing members of its own species, not for a reason other than just pure hatred or whatever, that's objectively bad, right? Same thing with harm towards children, harm towards women. I can't think of a culture off the top of my head that doesn't, if there's a crisis, doesn't say, hey, get the women and children off the boats first.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah. You'd be surprised at people that do that, but the people that do that are often looked at as, they're the people that don't get the women and children off first are looked at as scumbags.
Well, all right, I'll disagree with you there, because I do know lots of, well, not in general, but I think that is somewhat Western belief, because, like, for example, if you look at the Mongols, a lot of times the soldiers would just leave. They would leave the tribe, like the women and children behind, and then come back for them later, temporarily. They're temporarily retreat and come back later. It was like considered okay to like run temporarily, and then reclaim them later. Or like you take Native American cultures, for example, men would hunt, and that's pretty much it. Women would. Like, you have this idea of chivalry, or like...
Well, that stance comes from more of like almost a hunter-gatherer stance, that the dangerous thing, the hunting is the more dangerous thing. You look at these Native Americans, especially the Great Plains natives, a lot of them died during these buffalo hunts, right? Getting trampled in a stampede or what not have you. And it was more dangerous, so you want to protect the women and the children. And that's why they were more left behind.
Well, you look at that perspective. I'm not sure what their stance is. But what about the Mongols?
No, okay, yeah, sure. I'd have to look into that more. I haven't really heard about that or read about that. But like this whole discussion comes down to another one of our points. Like you have to take everything with a grain of salt, right? Like you can't be completely dogmatic one way. You have to have some form of skepticism there.
Right. In regards to what you're saying, I think it's a little bit deeper than that. It's not so. If you look at it from the guise of these things are necessary for the survival of the human race, or necessary for personal gain, because ultimately, by extension, children surviving is personal gain because they're furthering your tribe or whatever. But there's also a lot of instances in human morality that have nothing to do with our own personal gain, but we risk our and this is so what you were talking about. I think relates at least partially to empiricism, because this is a result of sensory experience, right? Sensing that, okay, this led to a positive outcome for me, therefore I'm going to do more of this. Those things ultimately lead to a personal gain without personal, they're ultimately you're benefiting from it.
But again, it goes back to the question that you just asked: is it empiricist because I was a sensory belief, or was it rational because it was born within me that this is bad, this is good?
But what I'm going to present to you is something that I think is more rationalist, and I'm going to present to you times in history where people sacrifice, or self-sacrifice for something that would not have any benefit towards them, simply because of moral reasons. So you take World War II, right? You take families that hid Jewish families.
Yeah.
They're inherently, let's say they're from a different race, for example, right?
Yeah.
There is this tribalistic view that humans still have, defending people of your own country, for example, or your own ethnic group, right? And
Schindler's List is based on a true story, right? From there.
Right, so what I'm trying to say is inherently, harboring a Jewish family during that time would not benefit you at all. You could have your family killed for that.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that that's something that won't really, from like an evolutionary standpoint, that doesn't really benefit you at all.
No, definitely.
But you're doing it because it's the right thing to do. So the reason why that's the reason why I bring that up, is because what you brought up can kind of be considered empiricist. But this specific example, you don't gain anything. You don't really gain anything. What you gain is your quote-unquote humanity. So then you're like, wait a minute, what is this idea of humanity? It's almost metaphysical.
Okay.
It's almost a metaphysical belief. Or we talk about religion in general, right? Or you talk about Christ.
Yeah.
Right? Giving himself up for the sins of, you can explain it better. In your terms, or in your words, how would you explain, Jesus dying on the cross to get rid of original sin?
Christ died to eliminate our sin. I mean, it's just as simple as that, right?
Right.
That's
basically what I was going to say.
Yeah, he sacrificed himself. He died so that we would not have to die.
Right. So how does that make any sense from just a self-serving perspective? It doesn't.
No.
It's completely self-sacrifice.
Yeah, Christ was selfless.
That's my point, though. People and humans will do selfless things. That has nothing to do with sensory experience, because ultimately sensory experiences in regards to morality, right? When we talk about, okay, I'm saving a kid, because it makes much more sense. You save your own children, for example, or you saved the children of your friends. You're essentially saving people that are part of your tribe. But just saving humans in general, there's no real reason to do that. Because even if you look at animals, right? Animals will kill other animals of their own species if they're not part of their collective. Like a pride of lions will fight, or two male lions from different prides will fight.
Yeah.
Right. But the idea of humanity is almost metaphysical in the sense that we're helping humans that have nothing to do with our tribe. You help people because it's the right thing to do. Where does that come from, right? Inherently, you and your tribe are not gaining anything from that specific thing.
Okay, yeah.
So we go back to harboring the Jewish family. You are risking your family's life by harboring a Jewish family. You could be killed too with them, and risking your own human life, but you're doing it because it's the right thing to do. What is that? That, in my opinion, is undoubtedly rationalist. Because, like I said, you can interpret what you were talking about, certain aspects of morality which are, self-serving. And that's not to say that's not a good thing, right? I think sacrificing your life for your children, for example, of course, is a great thing. Right? You don't want to have to do it, but it's a noble thing. I'm not denying that's noble, but it's still self-serving to an extent.
Okay.
You're furthering your family line. But humans helping other humans, without risking your livelihood of your family for another family that has nothing to do with you, really. You'll see instances of, it's not just Jewish it wasn't just Jewish families, friends of other Jewish families. It'd be people who completely didn't know each other, but they knew it was the right thing to do.
No, yeah.
I mean, I'm just using this as an example because everyone knows World War II. But, this concept exists. You ever watch, Hotel Rwanda?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so and a lot of people I'm sure have seen it, but basically, the Rwandan genocide?
Yeah, Hutus and Tutsis.
Yeah, so, who's the actor who plays, in Iron Man, he plays War Machine or whatever?
Oh, Don Cheadle?
Don Cheadle, yeah. So he was the lead actor in that, and he was a Hutu. So they were the people who were committing the genocide.
Yeah.
But his family were Tutsis. Now, he was a very upstanding man in that society. He owned a hotel, or he was he was either the owner or the manager of the hotel. So he got along with everyone, and this would include the Hoodoos who are genociding people.
Yeah.
So he harbored, or I don't like to use harbored has a negative connotation, but I don't know what the right. He gave refuge to a lot of Tutsis, right, at his hotel. And because of his good standing with a lot of the Hutus, even the people committing the genocide, he was able to keep them safe for a time. Now, towards the end, once they got more restless, they were basically, they were giving an ultimatum, and he said, we'll let you take your Tutsi family, out of there, and we'll let you guys out, right? So, completely self-serving, right? That would be, within we're talking about morality, right? But he chose instead to risk his own family's safety for the good of a bunch of people. Most of them he didn't even know, and eventually they were able to all get out. There's like a UN peacekeeping force or whatever, something like that, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So I just wanted to give another example besides the World War II Jewish example. Different instances in history when this happened. It's based on a true story, by the way. So in general, a lot of times you'll see people doing selfless things that have nothing to do, like risking your own safety and that of your family for other people. You know?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And it's not just like, and there's a lot of things that you do that are selfless that don't really sacrifice much. Like, you could sacrifice your time helping homeless people, but you're not really sacrificing that much. No. You're not risking anything. Yeah. But you risk something when, in these situations. So I think that speaks to a deeper kind of morality that you can't describe through it's metaphysical. Ultimately, it's this idea that we as humans have an inherently good thing within us that doesn't just lead to our own benefits. Yeah, and
that's not something that's created by observation. It's something that everybody can agree is good.
Right, like we could argue that's from God, for example, or like Leibniz talks about. Right.
Well, I mean, maybe Nazis think that. That harboring Jewish families is bad, but the rest of the world can look at it and say that it's good.
Even a lot of Germany. Even a lot of Nazis. A lot of Nazis helped Jewish families, right? So, and then we talked about morality changing from culture to culture, but then there being one singular morality that is true and that we know to be true, right? Talking about the Bible potentially, or any religion is your base. Any different people's potential basis for this type of morality, but It's just this deeper idea of being good just for the sake of being good. And have you read Plato's Republic?
No.
Okay. So the first part of Plato's Republic is all about the nature of justice. Okay. And I might have talked to you about it before.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit.
And they're just talking about why it's good to be just. And one of the arguments that someone brings up is, why don't you just be just on the outside but actually be corrupt, behind the scenes, right? And that would be part of like the whole using your senses to think, oh, I can get away with this if I appear good, right? Yeah. But then there's still this urge to truly be just and to create, a society, a sort of utopian society in Plato's Republic, that you're getting rid of injustice. You're creating a perfect society. Where does that come from? Even when, because ultimately it's more beneficial if one person cheats a bunch of other people for his own benefit, right? So I think that all these different deeper types of understanding regarding morality in general must mean something more, because we can't really explain it. Yeah. And maybe you can, but I just can't think of an easy explanation for that off the top of my head, right? No. So that's why I'll say that, certain hardwired things, things that lead to your own benefit, it's iffy if that's rationalism or empiricist. But then you go into these deeper ideas,
and it's undoubtedly rational at that point. Yeah.
Right. Because it has no benefit to you. We're coming a little bit to the end of this. I think we might have to turn this into a part 2. Regarding empiricism, and it'll allow us to do a little more research as well. Within empiricist thought, there's a lot of good to get out of it. Especially now, I know it seems that we're favoring rationalism over empiricism, and if it seems that way, it's just because, generally speaking, like we said, the empiricist way of thought seems to be more prevalent in today's world, and it's important to make sure that you don't, like, if we see something severely on one end. We want to like be the devil's advocate.
Okay.
And at least tackle the other side of it, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. That's exactly what's going on here, right? So you look at it's similar to the Stoicism versus Epicureanism analogy. You know, we were definitely taking the Stoic side.
Well, I am. I consider myself more on the side of Stoicism. And the same way I would consider myself more
a rationalist, right?
Yeah.
But that's not to say that there's nothing good to take out of Epicureanism, and is not to say that there's nothing good to take out of empiricism.
I'd say there's a lot to be taken out of empiricism.
No, yeah.
Yeah, especially when you consider the fact that rationalism was too highly regarded over empiricism, and like you look at the Catholic Church and their rejection of obvious things, like when Galileo, study of astronomy, and Copernicus saying, well, actually this, we revolve around the sun. Like obviously these are true, and you get this from sensory experience. So obviously it's important not to just rely on innate reason.
Well, I don't know, because I flew in an airplane one time and I couldn't see the curve of the Earth.
Oh no, the Earth must be flat. Well, actually, no. No, obviously we don't believe the Earth is flat, but sensory experience, right? You could say that, oh, I don't see a curve, it must be flat. Yeah. Anyway, there's a lot to gain out of empiricism. We'll talk about John Locke. We'll talk about the tabula rasa that we briefly brought up before, this blank state that people are born with, with no previous innate ability, innate knowledge, I guess, or innate ability to obtain knowledge. We'll also talk about David Hume, who famously said, "Custom is the great guide of human life." David Hume, oh my God, there is a guy who you would have thought was an asshole if you talked to him. And he was a really nice guy. He was this jolly. He's the typical jolly guy, happy, but he had to disagree with everything. A
lot of philosophers, I think I'd want to punch in the face.
Yeah.
Socrates.
Why? I'm gonna go take a piss, man. Why? Because I need to pee.
Well, why do you need to pee?
Well, I guess God made me that. Fuck you, Socrates.
Why did God make you that?
Exactly. And similarly, David Hume rejects anything. Like, how do you know you're real? Or he was like Jaden Smith. How do we know we see anything if our eyes aren't real or something? He was the guy that had to question everything, right? Mm-hmm. And so he came off as an asshole sometimes, but he wasn't. He was actually a very happy, jolly guy. But a lot of people, at the end of his life, I forget if it was him or somebody talking about him, Hume basically was like, holy fuck, what did I do? I just fucked up philosophy. And it took Immanuel Kant afterwards, who was also he was a big, in his early life he studied a lot of Leibniz, and later on he studied a lot of Hume. I think he at least attempts to facilitate a sort of a mixture of rationalism and empiricism, because he was a fan of both. He was a student of both throughout his life, and some people say he didn't sufficiently do that. But anyway, David Hume definitely fucked up philosophy a little bit, and Kant was kind of came in there like, all right, let's get the Gorilla Glue out.
Yeah, but all of this is probably going to have to end up being a story for a different day.
Yeah. I just wanted to kind of
introduce it real quick.
Introduce it for next week. There's going to be a lot of stuff, and then I think because we'll have more time, we can actually add to it a little bit. Because we originally planned for this to be like an hour and some change episode for both of them. But seeing as
it was an hour and some change, we're almost an hour and 20 now. Yeah.
So we'll definitely be able to go more in depth into empiricism next week, and it's still very important, regardless of the negative types of empiricism which I see present, which is positivism and Neil deGrasse Tyson. I'm still calling that guy out. He's taking everything I worked for. So I'm gonna debate his fucking ass. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. If you noticed a few times that we sounded like we changed topics a little bit, or our voice modulation changed, it's because we had a couple interruptions that we had to cut out today. There's some guy, the house, and the unit next to me is being sold, so there's occasionally people coming in to check it out. And then, my lovely woman Athena called me in the middle of this, and she apologized, but it was a bit of a distraction. Shout out to love my life. Anyway, so thanks for listening today, and we hope you'll join us next week. You have any last words?
As always, if you guys are watching this, if you guys like this, please make sure you do interact with the channel, spread it around. It really helps us a lot. We're not doing this for like the views or to get ourselves out there.
We just want to teach.
Yeah, we want to teach, and we in general see problems with the world around us, and we
Mm-hmm.
feel like these problems can be fixed through a philosophical examination of it. So if you feel the same way, if you like what we teach, make sure to give us a like and a subscribe, so that way the algorithms promote us more, and then
yeah.
send us to your friends.
Yeah, and know this. We like to teach, but we're still students. We're learning a lot.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of you may know much more than we do, but I think that doing these videos also helps me learn.
Oh, yeah.
Because it forces me to
Learning by teaching.
Yeah,
Learning
it's
by
like
teaching.
with jujitsu. During COVID, I would have little jujitsu classes, quote unquote, and not being the student helps because then you have to learn the moves better than the teacher. So, I love doing this. It's a lot of fun. I hope to do this for a long time, and thanks for watching. And we actually hit up the Instagram. I made a Twitter just because Elon Musk bought Twitter. I was like, all right, Twitter might be cool now. I have some hope. So I made a Twitter as well. It's the links in the on the channel. So hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll be hitting y'all up next week with empiricism, but we're still going to call this Rationalism and Empiricism Part 1. So thank you guys for listening. And as always, I'd like to finish off with saying, this is the Warrior Philosopher, building the foundations of the warrior philosophy. We'll see you next time. Ciao.